All right, today's lesson we're going to talk about safety in the science lab. This seems a little bit silly to be done online because hopefully, once we're able to return, if we're able to return, I would probably need to go over these rules with you again, with you in the actual classroom before taking you up to the lab. But it is part of our introductory notes in science, so we're going to go ahead and hit them now. These are also going to stay in that plastic page protector, as well as the What is Science notes. That way they can stay at the front of your binder because those are important to remember throughout the rest of the year, no matter which unit we are in at the time. So make sure you have your notes ready, as well as a pen or a pencil. Like I mentioned in the pod, these are not exactly set up like Cornell notes, but they're still fill in the blank. They're just a little bit faster and easier because there's quite a bit of information here. First of all, lab safety is important for everyone. Everyone is responsible. If you're going to go into the lab, that means that you are responsible enough and mature enough to act in such a way that keeps everyone safe. If you cannot, this is something that I take very seriously. If you can't behave yourself in the lab, then very simply, you won't go, and we'll find somewhere else for you to be while the rest of us have a good time. Science is a hands-on laboratory class. Okay, science is not a subject that we just sit and talk about. It is something that we also go in and experience. We get to touch the things. We get to put things together and see what happens. We get to experience the reaction. We get to test out different hypotheses and try to figure out puzzles and things, and do them with actual physical objects. So it's not just something that we can sit and talk about or watch videos about. It's much, much better if we can actually go in and experience it hands-on. And the lab is where we do that. You will be doing many laboratory activities, which require the use of hazardous chemicals and expensive lab equipment. We don't do necessarily a whole lot of labs up in the actual lab. Sometimes they will be more experiments or demonstrations that we can do together here in class or in our classroom. But when necessary or when we're able to, because we do share that lab with the rest of the middle school building, we'll go into the lab when it's available and when it makes sense for us to do so. When we do that, there are hazardous or dangerous chemicals in there, and there's also expensive lab equipment. So it's not necessarily something that you want to mess around with. Safety in the science classroom is the number one priority. Whether or not you've been told this, the number one rule of all teachers is to make sure that you stay safe. Okay. My secondary job is to teach you academics and things that you need to understand and know, and hopefully make you smarter. But my number one job is to keep you safe and take care of you. To ensure a safe science classroom, a list of rules has been developed and provided to you. That's the notes that we're doing now. These rules must be followed at all times. After this presentation, you will sign a contract. A signed lab safety contract is required before you can participate in labs. This is something that we'll have to do once you return to the classroom, but basically when I have you sign the contract, that is your promise to me that you will abide by the rules, and that if you don't, you will accept the consequences. It basically just is like a signed promise that binds you to obeying these rules, and then if you don't, you get in trouble. All right. Number one rule, general safety. First part, general safety guidelines. Be responsible at all times. This is not the place to play around. No horseplay, practical jokes, pranks, etc. The lab is not the place for those. Really, the classroom is not the place for those either. As you get to know me, you'll understand that I love to have fun. There is a time and a place for fun to be had, and it can be fun in the classroom as well. But the lab is just not the place to do that. There are too many dangerous things. There are too many chemicals, substances, tools, sharp objects that could hurt people. And that's just not the place for that. The place for that is outside at recess, not in the lab. Before you begin the experiment, you want to read all the instructions before beginning and follow all the instructions carefully. Okay, you don't want to read step 1 and then perform step 1, then read step 2, perform step 2. You want to read all of the steps, all of the instructions, and then proceed to follow those carefully. Do not touch the lab equipment until instructed to do so. Typically, if we go to the lab, I will have all of the equipment set up for us so that we can get in and get out as quickly as possible and use the most time that we can for the actual experiment. But once we enter, your job is to listen to my instructions very carefully. You stand there until I tell you to go to your stations, and you only touch the equipment once I tell you that you can. And then this goes without saying, but food, drink, and gum are not allowed in the science classroom. Gum certainly is not allowed in school at all, but food and drink is not something we want to bring to the lab. So when we go up there, you'll leave your water bottles and snack or whatever in the classroom. If you are in Mr. Deason's class, therefore meaning you would have me during snack break, you're still going to bring your snack with you in the morning, but we won't eat it until we get back to the classroom. Obviously, we're not going to take it to the lab. Keep the science room clean and organized. Clean up after yourself. It is extremely important that once we finish the lab upstairs, we put things back where they're supposed to be. Whether that means we're setting it up for the next 5th grade class to come up there, or if you're in my class and we're the last group in the lab that day, our job is to make sure everything is cleaned up for other classes to be able to come in and use once we're done. Notify the teacher immediately of any accidents or unsafe conditions in the science classroom. Things are going to happen. You may have something glass that break. You may knock over a cup of water or chemical or something like that. Let me know immediately. Don't panic. Just stop what you're doing and let me know, and we'll make sure we get that cleaned up or taken care of effectively and quickly. If necessary, wash your hands with soap and water after experiments. That's going to be generally all the time, especially right now with all of the COVID regulations. But whenever we do a lab, especially if it has to do with live animals or chemicals or things that may be dirty, we're going to wash our hands with soap and water after the experiments. I will remind you of that when the time comes, but just so you had that in the back of your mind. Okay, couple of safety symbols. For eye protection, you're going to wear safety goggles when working with chemicals, flames, or heating devices. This is to protect things from fire, obviously from getting into your face, especially your eyes, or explosions or pops of any sort. We're going to make sure we wear goggles for that. We do have those located in the lab. If by chance a chemical gets into your eye, you want to flush with water for 15 minutes and let me know. This is probably not going to happen because I'll be honest with you, we don't deal with a whole lot of chemicals in 5th grade. If we do, I am going to be the one to deal with them, probably not you. But just so you know, if something were to happen, you want to flush your eye with water, that means you're going to want to kind of pull up some water in your hand and then kind of splash it into your eye while opening and closing to kind of try and wash that out for 15 minutes. Sharp objects. If you can see right here, I'm going to try and, right here. Okay, this is what's called a scalpel. It is a very sharp type of knife that we'll use during our dissections. But whenever you're using knives or other sharp objects, you always want to walk with the points facing down. Again, you're probably not going to be carrying them anywhere. I will have them already set up for you, but this goes for any sharp object, whether you're at home with a knife in the kitchen or scissors if you're doing an art project or in the classroom. But anytime you have a sharp object, always walk with the point facing down. And then when you cut something, even with dissections or even using scissors, you want to cut away from your body. So for example, if you have the specimen or the object that you're looking at, you're going to cut on your desk, you want to make the cutting motion away from you, not towards your belly in case things were to slip. You don't want to cut yourself. Electrically, we're only going to ever use electrical items with labs, maybe if we have like a hot plate where we're heating something up, or our microscopes that have light bulbs in them, those have electrical cords. Whenever we use these, do not place a cord where someone can trip over it. That's just to keep them safe and free from injury. You never, never, never want to use electricity around water, okay? Girls, if you've ever seen like the warning tags on a blow dryer or a straightener or curling iron or something like that, and it says not to use it around water. They may even have this in like toasters and things, but it always says never to use them around water because water is a conductor, and if the electricity were to flow through that, it can shock you. So whenever you're plugging something in, just make sure it's a dry area where there is no type of water anywhere nearby. Once you're done with the equipment, you want to unplug it before leaving the room. You never want to leave a classroom with electrical equipment turned on and plugged in. Animal safety, we're not going to deal a whole lot with animals, but we will have some this year. So when we do that, just make sure you handle living organisms with teacher permission only. You're not going to touch them without my permission. When you are touching them, you always want to treat them humanely. That means kindly, okay? We're not going to pester or aggravate them on purpose, just for fun. We're going to treat them nicely the way we would want to be treated. And then always, always wash your hands after handling any kind of animals. That's just to keep you safe from germs and other things. When heating something, whenever you are heating up something, you want to make sure you tie back your hair, girls or boys, I guess. If you have long kind of flowing hair, just make sure it's pulled back. You don't want that to get caught into the flame. Same thing with loose clothes. If you're wearing a sweater or a jacket, you're either going to zip it up or take it off. You don't want to have any free articles of clothing kind of flopping around. You never want to look into the container as you are heating it, just in case it were to pop up or explode or something like that. When heated metal and glass looks like it is cooled off, even if you think it's been a while, make sure you use tongs or gloves before handling. If we ever need to do that, I'll show you what the tongs are, but it looks kind of like salad tongs, almost like fancy chopsticks kind of that you would use to pick up the glass object. That way you're not burning yourself. Or just make sure you have heat gloves on, which we do have up in the lab. And then never, ever, ever leave a heat source unattended. This would be like if you were to, light a candle or turn on a Bunsen burner in a classroom. You never want to leave without having someone watch it at all times in case something were to happen. Chemical safety, like I said, you're probably never going to deal with chemicals. We don't do a whole lot of experiments with them, and if we do, I will deal with them. But if in case you do, you want to read all labels twice before removing the chemical from the container. This is just to make doubly sure that you are using the right one. Never, ever, ever touch, taste, or smell a chemical unless instructed by the teacher. Nothing should go near your nose, eyes, face, or mouth when we're in the lab. Just never. But that's just kind of a blanket statement that will keep you safe from a lot of things. If you ever have to transfer chemicals, which again, you probably won't, I will probably do that for us. But in case you do, just make sure you transfer them carefully. You don't want to spill or put any in the wrong place. For hand safety, if a chemical or an unknown substance maybe spills onto your skin, you want to notify the teacher, and then we're going to rinse it with water for 15 minutes. Carry glassware carefully. Most of the beakers, test tubes, pints, and things like that we have up in the lab are made of glass. They do break very, very easily. So if you have to carry it from one place to another, you're going to want to make sure you use two hands. You're going to want to make sure that you're not squeezing it extremely hard, otherwise it may burst in your hands. Just make sure you're obviously being safety conscious there. But again, I will be there to help, but just so you're aware. And then I believe this is the last one, plant safety. Do not eat any plants in the lab. Like I said, the general rule is nothing goes in or near your mouth, face, hands, eyes, any of it. But again, obviously we're not going to eat plants. That would be bad. And then if you're handling plants, wash your hands if necessary. A good example would be poison ivy. If you're touching poison ivy, you want to wash your hands as quickly as possible so that you don't get the rash that's super itchy and annoying. All right, safety equipment. The only piece of safety equipment that we're going to review here is the fire extinguisher. There is a fire extinguisher located in the science lab. It looks just like every other fire extinguisher, so it's pretty easily recognizable. Ideally, this means in a perfect world, hopefully you are not going to operate the fire extinguisher. That would be an adult's job, aka me or another adult that's nearby. But just for knowledge's sake, just so you know how to operate one just in case, you want to remember the acronym PASS. I also have a video that I'll include in the pod after this as well. But the P stands for pull the pin. At the top of the fire extinguisher, there's a little silver pin with a circle on the side. You want to kind of yank that out, which will allow you to operate the handle. Otherwise, it kind of stays locked in place. Letter A. Let me get my pen here so y'all know where I am. Okay, so we just did P, pull the pin. Now we're on A. Ooh, this is very hard with my finger. Letter A stands for aim the hose at the base of the fire from 5 to 6 feet away. This is very important. You don't want to aim the hose at the actual flames because the source of the fire is what's burning beneath the flame. So you want to point it at the base of the fire. And then you want to make sure that you're 5 to 6 feet away. Otherwise, burning embers could kind of spray onto you and burn you. So after you pull the pin and aim the hose at the base of the fire, then you're going to do the first S, which stands for squeeze the handle. And then once you're squeezing the handle and the extinguishing material is coming out, the last S stands for sweep the hose back and forth across the fire. You don't want to hold it in one particular spot. Obviously, you want to spray across the entire base. You want to sweep it nicely, easily, carefully, not super fast, just making sure you're getting the whole thing. Like I said, I will have, there's a video in the next slide that reviews this process as well, but I've never had to operate a fire extinguisher. If we're in a situation where someone needs to do that, I will be the one to do that unless, Lord forbid, something were to happen to me, but this is just good knowledge for you to know anyway. Oh, where did my pointer go? There he is. Okay, lastly, oh, you can't see this. Can we get that to go away? Okay, lastly, if you're on fire, obviously always remember to staff drop and roll. That would be your first line of defense there. And then in the slide, this is where I will include the YouTube video for the fire extinguisher as well. So to apply some of the things we've learned, I want you to pause the video for a second and tell me what is wrong with this picture. There's one, if not more, things that he is doing incorrectly here. All right, so hopefully you pause the video and now know the answer. But for one thing, he has goggles here that he's not using. Okay, they're just sitting here pointlessly. There is also a knife hanging off, or a scalpel, or some kind of sharp object hanging off the edge of the table here. He might brush up against it and cut himself. It may fall off and hurt someone else. That's also a big no-no. Here we have an open container that's very close to the edge of the table. He's probably going to want to bring that into the desk a little more, if nothing else, or, obviously put the cap on it in case it were to fall and smash everywhere. And then over here, we have a lab coat that's hanging onto a wash sink. Okay. When I say wash sink, this will make more sense when we actually go into the lab, but this lab coat is probably not supposed to be there and is really doing no good. Lastly, you can see he's trying to plug something into the wall here, and it looks like it's dripping, meaning it's wet. This is a big no-no, okay? Big X. Never, never, never want to operate electrical equipment near a wet area. All right, next picture. Let me go ahead and erase these. While I'm doing that, go ahead and see if you can find some of the issues that are wrong here. Wow, this is really difficult. If there's a better way I can. Here's the eraser. Oh, wow, that was much easier. Okay, so in this picture, we have a couple of things wrong. Here you can see this is called a graduated cylinder. This is a big glass tube that she is being maybe a little bit too careless with that could fall over and break, not to mention the contents inside of the cylinder are going to spill. Neither of them are wearing goggles, as you can see. And right here, we have a Bunsen burner or an open flame where he is heating the test tube. He is doing the right thing by using the tongs to heat the test tube and not his hands, but neither of them are wearing goggles. Her hair is down, which is a big no-no. Obviously, if she's going to be working with an open flame, that needs to be tied back. So those could be issues there. And then a little bit of a minor, I mean, it's still a problem, but not as big of a danger, is just some trash we see here piled up onto the counter. Again, when working in the science lab, we want to be clean and neat and organized as much as possible. All right, let me do my handy dandy. Perfect. All right, now what's wrong with this picture? Go ahead and pause and take a minute to look at this. All right, so a couple things we could say. These gentlemen are not doing very well. Right here, we have this fellow putting this beaker way too close to his mouth. Looks like he's trying to smell it or sniff something. Again, it's way too close. If you need to smell something, you want to waft it into your nose, which I will show you how to do if that time ever comes. But you never, ever, ever want to put your face that close to whatever it is that you're experimenting with. Now, they are wearing goggles, which is a good sign. But again, this is still dangerous even with goggles on. Here we see a soda on the table in the lab. That's a big no-no. No food or drinks in the lab. We also see trash sitting on the table. They need to be a little more organized here. We see him unplugging this. This would be like a hot plate of some sort that's used to heat something up on top. There doesn't seem to be any water, so that's okay. He's also unplugging it, which is good. But if this in his hand were a glass of water or some kind of liquid, that might not be a great plan. But those are the three things I see here. There may be more, but those are at least three that we could say. Okay, what's wrong with these statements? Hal says that his teacher is solely, that means she is the only one who is responsible for preventing lab accidents. Okay, just so you know, lab is short for laboratory. The problem with this statement is it is not just the teacher's job to keep everyone safe. It is the student's job as well to not only know what the rules are, but also to follow them and be responsible at all times. This one, Keisha started the lab activity before reading it through completely. If you remember at the beginning of this lesson, I told you you want to read the steps of the experiment first before beginning. You never want to read step 1 and then do step 1, read step 2, do step 2. You want to read all of the steps and then begin with step 1. Ricardo decided to do a lab activity that he read about in a library book before the teacher came into the classroom. Okay, it is okay to have ideas of labs that you want to do. I cannot guarantee we're going to be able to do them, but you never want to begin a lab or an experiment without the teacher in the classroom. Okay, that is for your own safety, not because we're trying to be rude or mean or boring, but is to make sure that you stay safe, that all of the equipment is safe, that you're using it well, and that no one's going to get hurt. Stephanie says that safety goggles mess up her hair and give her raccoon eyes, so she refuses to wear them. This should be a pretty obvious one. It doesn't really matter what your hair looks like or your raccoon eyes. If it's going to keep your eyes safe, then that is what we're going to do. So you really don't have the option to refuse to wear goggles when told to. If you're told to wear them, you have to wear them or you won't do the lab. Barbie and Ken. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Barbie and Ken accidentally break a beaker full of some chemical. Instead of risking getting in trouble, they quickly clean up the mess with a paper towel and throw it in the garbage. Okay, now, at first glance, it sounds like, oh, they did the right thing. They took care of their own mess, not a big deal. When we're in the lab and something happens, especially if it's some chemical that has fallen everywhere, you need to tell an adult because it may be that chemical needs to be cleaned up differently than a normal spill would be. And in order to keep everyone safe, they need to be aware of what has happened. So even if you're trying to be helpful, tell the teacher and then she can tell you how to be helpful, because it may be that even by the way that you've cleaned it up, you really haven't actually cleaned it up and it's still a dangerous setting for someone else. All right. What to do in an emergency? If there is a fire alarm, this goes for really any of your classes, but since we're on talking about safety, we can mention this here. Quietly get up and push in your chair. You are not to talk. Okay, as a reminder, do not panic, do not scream. If something were to happen, just get quiet. Let's not make it a big ordeal. Just stand up, push in your chair, and wait. Walk toward the door in an orderly fashion. We're not going to all scream and rush to the door. We're going to make sure we walk to the door in an orderly fashion, so we can get everyone out quickly and safely. Once we are outside, quickly line up in alphabetical order by last name. We're probably not going to do that. If we can get in number order, awesome. If not, it's okay, because I'm going to have a class roll with me, and I can still call off the roll there, make sure we have everyone there and safe. You will remain in line until the drill is over. Oh, and just a quick note, when we, from the middle school building, when we have a fire alarm or a fire drill, we walk over towards the grassy patch by the high school building, which I'm sure when we have a drill, we will show you, but it's not far. It's pretty easy. And then the last thing, which is extremely important, is to remain silent throughout the entire alarm. Not because we're trying to be rude, but so that all people can hear important directions, and so that teachers can get an idea of who they have and who, if anyone, is still missing that needs to be gotten out of the building. All right. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Like I said, before we actually go to the lab in person, I'm going to have everyone that is here sign the lab safety contract, which just means that you are aware of these rules, you understand these rules, and that you will abide by them, and that you'll accept the consequences if you choose not to. So other than that, though, go ahead and go back to the pod and move on with the lesson.